Well, here we are with a WPC PowerDriver board on 4th of July weekend. And somebody has replaced cap C5 in the past. Nothing wrong with that. I don't like the form factor of that cap, but it'll work. I replaced C4 and C2 already, and I was just getting ready to dig into these headers. I also added this blocking diode. So I'm looking at these headers. Whoever did this in the past didn't use the ramp lock headers. And look at this little bit of roasting going on over here. Looks like a toaster wire. And here's my favorite part. I wish this jumper technique had never been published. Look at this. Well, some of these I'm just going to leave because it's working. I don't want to violate my own rule. But some of them I have to take off. Like, I'm going to replace this power header. So, is this jumper necessary? Probably not. Since this goes between a fuse block and a header, there's no reason to think that that through hole has been compromised. How about from this bridge to the header? If that's the OEM bridge, there's no reason to think it's been compromised. This one definitely, there's a trace on the other side of the board. Of course, you can't see it, that does that same thing. And of course, this mess down here in the GI section is going to have to get addressed. Giddy up. So we're back again with Old Ugly here. I still didn't get to J115. But 120 and 21 they're kind of bad, but I can make this work. I did have to put a wire stitch at this through hole. This is the only way that the circuit gets from this fuse through this through hole and this fuse through this hole. Remarkably, there's continuity between front and back side of the board here. The back side looks poorly still, but that's not as important right now as this front side. Over to J115 of this burn victim, I'll say. And every through hole was pulled or burnt out along here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of 7. This is the only one that survived, was torn when the other connector was put on or burned like this. So I've implemented a wire stitch for all of the connectors, all the pin positions that need to get through to the other side. And I have tested for resistance between these two pins, and I'll do it again after I get these installed, because this carbon is conductive, and you can see it's just, I punched a hole right through there because I was messing about. But that carbon gets conductive, so if there's any resistance there at all, I'm going to have to dig a little bit more out. So here's the back of Big Ugly, and these jumpers are going to stay. They're redundant, but there's no point in taking them off. Same with those up there. I have managed to get rid of all the ones on the GI, and this is what the back of the board looks like now. It's still a little crispy there, you can see, but after I squirt that with Castrol Super Clean and use a brass brush, most of that crap is going to come off. The only thing I don't like about using this technique is of wire stitches. Well, some of them come through pretty good, but if you don't have a pad to solder to anymore, as is the case for these top three, there's just nothing you can do, and you're just left with this ugly sort of silver BB of solder that connects the wire stitch to the pin on the other side. And I have measured resistance again between the pins, and it is open, so there is no conductivity occurring between this mass of carbon that's on here. So the next step is to take this thing over to the bench. I could clean up a little bit of this crud from a previous solder job. My Hakko is jammed up right now. One more thing before I take this to the bench. I always get a kick out of this because there's a lot of guys that'll say, oh, reflow all the solder joints on the board. And folks end up reflowing the solder joints that hold the heat sinks down. This does not one speck of good to do this sort of thing. I just find it comical. All right, let's boot Big Ugly up. I've got it on my test rig with the WPC Fliptronics 2 test ROM supercomputer, which does absolutely nothing except I like it, is doing its thing. The lamp matrix working, no coils locked on. I do have a GI light out. Must have missed something. Let's get into test. And solenoid test. And I get it running. And this WPC test ROM tests the first 16 solenoids, and then you have to move on to the other tests. GI, well, GI is dimming. You can see that red lamp is not lighting up, so there's a discontinuity. Now, I did check the fuses, so I'll have to figure out where I've got a break in the circuit there. Let's check the lamps and the flashers at the same time. I wish those flashers went slower, but I do like that, and they're both working correctly. So let me get to the bottom of this general illumination circuit. And the first thing I'm going to do is buzz my connections from the power input to the fuses and to the triacs, and then from the triacs down to the output at J120. And if you've never done this before, there are several diagrams. There's a diagram for each of the GI strings in the pin wiki that our friend from Europe, Sashka Voxkul, I'm sure I mispronounced that, but he put those together, and it makes tracking down general illumination issues trivial almost. I'll put a link to that in the description for this video. And it looks like we have success. Let me plug this one into the other connector just to make sure. I believe I stated earlier in the video that this pin did in fact have continuity to the right side of F110. Wrong. You are wrong, Bison Breath, as somebody famous used to say. So I put a jumper on the back of the board, and we are good to go. So let me go through that, at least the GI test one more time. Well, here's solenoid. All right, that's good enough. We don't need to see all that. Here's the GI test. I really need to put some labels along the bottom here that match the wire color for the connectors that come out of J120 and 121. The LM323K is delivering 4.93 per this meter, but it's really about 4.98. 12 volts regulated is right on, 12 volt unregulated is about 15. That's normal. Flipper power 73 and flash lamp power 21. One more time, lamps and flashers. All right, I'm going to show you this board one more time after I take it outside tomorrow and clean it up, get rid of some solder flux and some other detritus, I guess, on the back of this board. So here's Big Ugly out in the drying rack. I just squirted it down with a Castrol Super Clean, and you can see the stuff does a great job of taking off old solder flux. It's still wet with water still, but it does a wonderful job of cleaning up solder flux that's left over. Here's the remaining jumpers. I would guess all of those are unnecessary, but there's no point in me taking them off. Front side cleaned up really nice. Over here, that's about as good as it's going to get given the amount of damage that was done to this board. Thank you so much for sending it, and it should last a good long time.